Hi, this is Julie with an invitation before we begin. Over the years, I've learned that January never begins the year the way I hope it will. So, as an annual tradition, I facilitate an opportunity for a fresh start in February with a live virtual milestone hike on Zoom that allows us to use the metaphor of an ascent and descent, no actual hiking required, to close a chapter and begin again. If you'll be ready for a do-over and want reflective space to make meaning of the year that ended and set intentions for what's ahead, join us. Find the link in the show notes or visit mothersquest.com/milestone-hike to register. Now on to the show.
The question that I was left with was, well, if that's the truth, if we are always exposed to toxins, no matter what we do, what can we do to protect ourselves? And the answer was Ayurveda. When we do these practices, we are protecting ourselves, not only for the future, but today and every day. We are protecting our health so that when we have to deal with some kind of a diagnosis, some kind of a symptom, we are more resilient, we're more capable of handling it.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast, the first of 2025 and the final episode of season 9 before I take a winter break and prepare to launch season 10 in the spring. As I sat down for this conversation with Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh just before the holiday break, I had no idea of the enormity of the challenges we would face as we began this new year. The toxins we're navigating, from the California wildfires to this new presidential term, are overwhelming. This makes Avanti's wisdom feel especially vital right now. In this episode, Avanti shares intentional practices for protection and healing, especially in the midst of adversity. And she invites us to honor this month as a season for slowing down and resting rather than leaping into the pressure of a new year, new you mindset. My own desire to take a pause this winter led me to invite Avanti back to the podcast. If you didn't catch our first conversation, I encourage you to go back and listen. It's an incredible exploration of her journey from ER doctor to an Ayurveda wellness expert, bridging Eastern and Western medicine to help people live healthier, more intentional lives. She's the host of the Healing Catalyst podcast, the author of The Health Catalyst, and her latest book, The Longevity Formula, Ayurvedic Principles to Reduce Inflammation, Increase Cellular Repair, and Live with Vitality, was just released. Through all these vehicles, she translates ancient healing principles into accessible practices for modern living. During our conversation, you'll hear how, while writing Longevity Formula, Avanti was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. She was confronted with the humbling truth that even as a healer dedicated to healthy living, she couldn't prevent this diagnosis or the aggressive treatments it required. Yet through her journey, she found that Ayurveda, while not a cure-all, provided powerful tools to support her body's healing, resilience, and ability to navigate such adversity. By sharing her story along the way through her treatment, she became a beacon of hope for others. One of those inspired by Avanti's example is Alexia Vernon, powerful speaker coach and women's leadership trainer, former podcast guest, and member of the Mother's Quest community. It's an honor to have Alexia dedicate this episode.
Hello, I'm Alexia Vernon, and I'm honored to dedicate this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast to my friend Avanti Kumar Singh. Avanti and her podcast, The Healing Catalyst, were a tremendous source of comfort for me as I navigated a diagnosis of ductal carcinoma in situ, or what's called DCIS, a non-invasive stage 0 breast cancer. Avanti's new book, The Longevity Formula, was the very book I brought with me into pre-op as I awaited my partial mastectomy. It offered me strength, clarity, and a deeper connection to my own healing journey. I'm the CEO of Step Into Your Moxie, a vocal empowerment coaching and training company that supports organizational leaders, as well as the coaches, consultants, and trainers who develop them, to use their voices to advocate for themselves, champion the ideas and causes that matter to them, and inspire others to take meaningful action. My recent health journey has deepened my passion for patient advocacy and strengthened my connection to Avanti's mission of helping others to embrace healing, wellness, longevity, and trust their intuition. In this episode, Avanti and Julie explore the themes of healing through Ayurveda, finding courage, especially when it feels really hard to access, and the importance of giving ourselves the gift of pause when we begin a new year. I hope this conversation inspires you to cultivate greater self-compassion, self-forgiveness, and self-trust, and to use your voice to create positive change, whether that's in your career, in your relationships, for your health, or for the causes that matter most to you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Alexia, for your heartfelt dedication, and to you and Avanti for modeling the power of truth-telling, healing practices, and using your voices to uplift and guide others. This episode left me with a renewed commitment to start this year with a slower, more reflective pace. It reminded me to follow nature's rhythms and embrace this season as a time for pause and reconnection. This isn't about resolutions or quick fixes to the challenges. It's about giving ourselves the space to breathe and protective practices that will build our resilience for whatever lies ahead. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Avanti, welcome back to the Mother's Quest podcast. This conversation has unfolded in such a serendipitous way. You're exactly who I want to talk to as we're going into the holiday season. And I have this intention of wanting to welcome in rest and renewal. You have your book coming out next week. So I'm just so honored to have you and be able to delve deeper into the new thoughts and ideas that have been coming together for you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Julie. I'm so excited to talk to you and to be with you. And yes, I agree. This all kind of happened in this serendipitous way over the last few days. And it's exactly where I need to be right now. So thank you for having me.
So I'm going to encourage anyone listening. I will make sure to include a link to our first episode together on the podcast. And we'll encourage anybody to press pause and go back and hear about your full and complete epic life journey. But in this conversation, we're going to look at what you're on a quest for and the epic life guideposts through the lens of your new book. So let's start with the question, what do you feel like you're most on a quest for right now? And how does that connect to the book you're about to bring out into the world?
I would say, there's a couple things, but for me personally, I'm on a quest to continually protect my health, which is a big learning I had while I was writing this book. And the journey that I've been on, the health journey I've been on in the past 2 years. But then in a bigger way, more sort of for the mission I have of the work and the Dharma I have, is to really help people tap back into their inner wisdom. It really hasn't changed since the first time we talked on your podcast a few years ago. My mission is really the same and the quest is still the same, is to really help as many people as I can tap back into their inner wisdom for healing and to tap into the power of Ayurveda and Ayurvedic medicine. So those would be the two things I'm really thinking about right now.
I love that. If it's okay, I'd love to unpack some terms
Sure.
to help deepen the understanding for me and others. You mentioned Dharma, which is a word that I think so many of us have heard. Say a little bit more about what that means and what your Dharma is.
Sure. Dharma, it can be interpreted in different ways, but the way I think about it is not just your life's purpose, but perhaps the contract that you've made with your higher self, with other souls that are traveling through this lifetime with you, or the work that you are going to do in this lifetime, the lessons that you're going to learn, the things that you're going to teach other people. I'm South Asian and I believe in reincarnation. And that is part of Dharma. It's what are you here? What have you been put on this earth in this lifetime to do, to learn, to teach? So for me, that's very much what Dharma means.
And then tell me more about Ayurveda and some of the core principles behind that.
Sure, absolutely. So Ayurveda is the healing system of India and South Asia, and it is a system of healing that is 5,000 years old, over 5,000 years old. It's considered the oldest healing system that we know of, that has basically the roots of every other healing system including Western medicine and traditional Chinese medicine. They all have their roots in Ayurveda. And if I really kind of had to sort of boil it down to a few, like an essence, right? The essence of Ayurveda is this idea that when you live in harmony with nature, you will have optimal health. And it's really that simple. And we know that that's true from a medical scientific point of view, knowing what we know about circadian rhythm and the circadian clock. So it's really this idea that when you live in harmony with nature, you'll have beautiful health, you'll stay in balance, and you'll be able to live vibrantly.
So then let's bridge that, the concepts of Ayurveda. And also, it's just mind blowing to hear about how ancient it is and how it's the root of every other medical system. I would love to bridge that to the focus of your new book, because I know you wrote a first book as well. What's different for you about what you're trying to share and communicate through your new book? And also, maybe how does that connect to the healing journey you've been on in the last few years?
Sure. So, the first book I wrote was called The Health Catalyst. And that was very much a primer, sort of a beginner's guide to Ayurveda. And I wrote that back in 2020, right before the pandemic, and self-published it. And it got a lot of attention. I was blown away by how many people really wanted to learn this information. And this new book is called The Longevity Formula, and it's Ayurvedic Principles really to live with vitality. And this book came about because 3 years ago when I started this project, I was turning 50. I'm 53 now. And I was, coming up on that sort of milestone birthday and thinking about what does the next era of my life look like? I just sent my second child off to college and my children were launched and I was an empty nester, and just thinking about what's the next sort of phase or era of my work, of my life. And I started thinking about my elders, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and how they just live with such vitality and full cognitive function and living independently, connected to their communities, to their purpose, to their families, involved in their lives, right? As they would get into their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And I was thinking, like, how are they doing that? What is the secret sauce there? And so I sort of really started to read and study and think about what are the connections here. And I started to make those connections between Ayurveda and the texts of Ayurveda. And many of my mentors have written about Ayurveda, and then also the medical science. I always have had a very integrative approach to this work. And I started to see a lot of things that I was like, oh, the light bulbs went off of like, that's how it connects. Oh, I understand these principles, these sort of practices that I've grown up with, that I have seen my whole life and that I've written about and I've been teaching about. I see how that connects to longevity. I get it. I understand how these mechanisms of aging slash on the other side, longevity that we know of in medical science, how that connects to these practices we've been doing for 5,000 years. And that's where the idea for this book really came from.
I love that so much. First of all, you and I were chatting before we pressed record about this episode that my son and I just won an award for, a Signal Award. And it was because when he turned 13 and then again when he turned 20, we went on something called a milestone hike. This process that I've experienced myself once and then have developed and done it with my kids and with clients, where you pause during a major milestone moment and really make meaning of it. So I love that you didn't just run by your 50-year milestone and you paused to see what was there for you in terms of deepening your awareness of your work and your purpose. And then the other thing is you and I are the same age. So I just had a 53rd birthday on December 1st. And I find myself increasingly interested in what can I do to care for myself at all levels so that I can live long, but not just live longer, but continue to live what I call my epic life, like, live in the best way. And my mom, who's about to turn 85, is just also has such a vibrant life. And looks beautiful, but is such a beautiful human on the inside and is so connected to her friends and her 55-year plus book club. And I'm just really excited to dive in deeper to the wisdom of this book. And I'm so grateful that you slowed down to notice what was next for you in terms of your own dharma and bringing this to us.
Yeah. I think for so many of us, when we stop and really think about what is it that we are thinking about? What are the things that we're challenged with? What are the things that we're wondering about, curious about, or want to help ourselves with? I feel like some of the most beautiful and rich work comes out of that because
Yeah.
when we're looking for those answers for ourselves, we have so much to share with other people. And that's exactly what happened to me. Like, this is just a question I asked myself of what's my next era look like? And the next thing I know, I'm talking to a publisher about writing a book and giving them a book proposal. And because of my own curiosity and how does this all work? And how did they do that? And so, yes, thank you for saying that. It was really allowing myself to pause and think a little bit and just be with myself and my emotions and ask the questions and not just be on autopilot and be in sort of the, okay, now I need to do this. Now I should do this. Now I must do this. It was more like, okay, but what do you want to do, Avanti? What does that look like for you and why? So really wanted to stop and ask those questions. And then the second part of your question, which how did this sort of unfold for me while I was writing, that caused me to pause once again. And we were talking about this before we started recording. And, I shared this in my book. I've shared on social media through all of it. About 4 months into writing the book, I got a diagnosis that sort of brought me to my knees. My body got a diagnosis of breast cancer, and it was completely out of nowhere. I have no genetic markers. I have no family history. And so it really leveled me and really upset me and pissed me off, quite honestly. I was really angry because I was like, are you kidding? I have spent my life taking care of other people, not just in my family roles and responsibilities, but in my chosen profession as a physician. I went to medical school, I'm a doctor. And now I've spent the last 15 years of my life teaching Ayurveda, going back to the medicine I grew up with. And I do all of these practices every day. And here I am with this diagnosis. And it was a really challenging time. And it was, of course, right in the middle of writing this book on longevity. So there were so many things that were swirling through my head of like, I'm writing about longevity, and here I am dealing with this diagnosis of breast cancer. How does this all make sense? And, of course, in the moment, I didn't know how it made sense, but going through it, and, it's been a year since I finished my treatment. And I think really the lessons that came from that experience changed my perspective in many ways, but also deepened my perspective. And I think really added to what I wrote and what I thought about when I wrote this book. So I think that answers your question.
Well, before we move on, just to clarify and confirm, in what way did you feel that it ended up deepening your understanding of this question that got sparked in your 50th birthday? What do you know now in a deeper way that you didn't know before?
I think that probably subconsciously I knew this, but I never consciously really thought about it. But what came to me was I always knew that Ayurveda had a lot of preventative pieces, things that would really be preventative for lots of health issues. That was something I talked about a lot in my work. But it was through this experience that I really started to understand. And it sort of came to me while I was going through my treatment that once I got through the sort of being really angry about it, I realized that Ayurveda is protective. And that was the big aha, this idea that Ayurveda is protective. And let me explain. It's sort of, I was so upset thinking, I've been doing all this stuff and what the heck? And then I realized, as I went through my treatment, everyone on my healing team, whether it was my traditional oncologist or my integrative oncologist or the radiologist or the surgeon or my friends or anybody, they were like, how are you bouncing back so fast? Because, I had a very, very intensive treatment that I did. I went back to full traditional medicine. I had intensive chemotherapy, 8 rounds, spaced 2 weeks apart. And it was very aggressive chemotherapy because my healing team said, you're very young, you're 50 years old, 51 years old at the time, and you have no other medical issues. We're going to hit it hard. And so they did a very aggressive treatment protocol because usually you have 3 weeks or maybe 4 weeks between treatments. And I only had 2 weeks between 8 rounds. And then I had a double mastectomy followed by, and that was exactly 4 weeks after finishing my 8th treatment. And then 4 weeks after having my double mastectomy, I did 15 rounds of chemotherapy. So I finished all of my treatment in 7 months. From the day that I was diagnosed until the day I had my last radiation treatment was exactly 7 months. Now, that doesn't usually happen. And again, it's not to say I'm special or anything. It's that I was able to bounce back between every treatment, every stage of treatment very quickly. And I realized that it's because I had been doing all of these things that I was able to do that. I didn't have a single treatment delay because if I had not been well enough and strong enough to handle the treatment, my treatment team, my healing team would have delayed my treatment. They would have had to. And that happens all the time for patients who are going through intensive treatment for any form of cancer. But I didn't have a single treatment delay. And I really attribute that to Ayurveda and this idea that it's protective. And so what I kind of came out with after all of that was this understanding that we live in a toxic world. That is just the reality. We live in a toxic world. It's toxic in every way, not just the environmental toxins and the stress that we're under and the social media that we are influenced by, but politics, relationships, right? Anything. You can think of any aspect of life, and there are a lot of toxic components to it. We've just been through a really significant election here in the United States, right? And so the reality is we live in a toxic world. And unless you're going to just isolate yourself and sort of hide in your home and wrap yourself in bubble wrap, you will be exposed to toxins, right? You will be. That's just a reality of the modern world that we live in. And so the question that I was sort of left with was, well, if that's the truth, if we are always exposed to toxins, no matter what we do, what can we do to protect ourselves? And the answer was Ayurveda. When we do these practices, we are protecting ourselves, not only for the future, but today and every day. We are protecting our health so that when we have to deal with some kind of a diagnosis, some kind of a symptom, we are more resilient, we're more capable of handling it. So that's really what I came out with. That's sort of, I think, the perspective that maybe I kind of knew before I started writing the book. It was somewhere subconscious, but it really came to the forefront into my conscious awareness through this experience of breast cancer.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And, as somebody who was just watching your journey from afar, it's really powerful to see how you can be both honest about the full range of emotions you were experiencing and also how you made meaning in it. And I'm so thrilled for you that you're on the other side right now.
Thank
And
you.
of course, always hoping that healing continues. And I know these protective measures are going to help you. And I'm excited now to dive in a little bit more on, obviously, we all need to get the book so that we can have the full range of details. But I am excited to at least look at some highlights. So
Sure.
we're going to use the Epic Life Framework, which we did also use in our first interview, but through the lens of your book itself. And Epic, as a reminder, has been a metaphor for me of the kind of life I want to live. And then also the guideposts are these particular things I'm always paying attention to, especially in the years that I'm raising my children, that I think are going to help me live that kind of life. So the first one, E, is about engaging mindfully. And this is typically how we connect with our children or our family or the next generation. I realized I had 2 questions in the shower this morning that were bubbling up for me about this guy's shower. Because I think there's a lot of reciprocity between us and our kids. So one, I'm curious, as we're trying to help our own children grow up to thrive and hopefully have a long, healthy future, it's maybe something that we can share with them or might be particularly resonant for them. And then I'm also curious about, as we're raising our kids, what's something as a parent that is very beneficial in terms of staying healthy and vital while we're going through the roller coaster ride of parenting? It's a two-parter.
So, the first thing that comes up for me is actually something, I think it's the same answer for both of those questions.
Interesting.
And it's actually a lot of people, when I've been doing these interviews and talking to people about the book, as I'm gearing, in this book launch mode with the book coming out next week on the 17th, I've been asked, well, if you had to pick a few practices from your book, because I do go through about 18 or 20 different practices that support longevity from an Ayurvedic perspective, and then I back it up with all the science. They said, well, what are a few that you would say would be the most important? And actually, I think the most important practice is sort of my answer to your question, which is connection. I think that what I learned, and through my own experience with breast cancer, but generally in my life, but also through all of the reading and sort of working with patients and students, is this understanding that connection is one of the most powerful healers, the most powerful medicine that we have. And let me back up and talk about the flip side of that, which is loneliness, right? The US Surgeon General a few years ago came out with this huge report on the epidemic of loneliness, as he called it, in the United States, especially post-pandemic. And that's something that I think many of us in the medical community have always known to be true. And we have more and more data to support that. That loneliness is just as detrimental to your health as smoking, as not exercising and moving, as not eating close to the earth, eating lots of processed foods. It's just as detrimental to your health. In fact, there's actually a study that was done that showed that a perceived sense of loneliness is as detrimental to your health as smoking 1 pack of cigarettes a day.
Wow.
Take that in. That's huge. I mean, when I read that, I was like, whoa, right? That's just a perceived sense of loneliness. Yeah, it is. And so I really thought about that a lot. And I think what I realized, and there were so many lessons that I learned through my journey. And one of the big, very personal lessons for me was the idea of receiving love from others, something that I'd never been very good at. And I knew that I had to be able to do that to get through this. And the connection that came through that act of receiving love from my community, my friends, my family, strangers, my audience online and for my podcast, et cetera, and how connection is so important. And so I think that teaching our children to do that and then also modeling that as parents and really engaging in that for our own lives is so important for our health. Connecting with ourselves, connecting with other people, connecting with something larger than ourselves, whether it's, we call it the universe or the divine, whatever you want to call it. I think that having that connection every day is so, so vital. And I would say it's one of the most important things you can do for your health.
Yeah. And I think about my own motherhood journey, especially raising two neurodivergent kids, just how much being able to build relationships with other moms and learn from them and talk about what's hard. A lot of that through this thing, Mother's Quest, that I just dreamed up by myself to meet my needs, trusting that if I was going to create something that was going to help me, it would also help other people. Just what an incredible difference that has made in my life and has been so instrumental, especially when things get hard, which they do in cycles. So that makes a lot of sense. But I am really taken aback at just how much scientific knowledge there is about the detrimental impact on your health if you don't have those connections.
Yeah, I mean, it's just significant. I just think that, human beings were not designed to live in isolation. We were designed and put on this earth to connect with others. And I think maybe this goes back to that question about Dharma, and sort of my perspective of Dharma is, what was I put on this earth in this lifetime to teach, learn, do, and not in service of myself, but in service of others, in connection with others. And so it comes back to that for me too.
Well, that is a great segue into the next guidepost, P, which stands for passionate and purposeful impact. And this is about the work that we do in our world beyond our family. What are some key Ayurvedic practices that relate to our work in the world and how we sustain ourselves in the midst of that?
One of the things I'm thinking about is when you talk about some of the basics of Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, we don't believe that you gain or lose health in a moment. It's not like you show up at the doctor's office and suddenly you have no health or you gained all your health. It's sort of this idea that you lose your health or gain your health along the way during life, in the everyday moments of life, right? And so that also means that everything in life affects your health. It's not an isolation of just the food that you eat or the amount of exercise you do. Those are important things, but it's also taking into account every aspect of health, every aspect of life affects your health. And so one of the things that I talk about sort of 5 or 6 different areas. So, it's your diet, everything that you take in through all of your senses, including food, right? But all forms of food. It's the state of your relationships. It's the environment, not just toxins or the air that we breathe and the water we drink and the food that we eat and what's in those things, but also the spaces that we live, work, and play in. It's also our lifestyle and routines, the things that we do every day, the things that we don't do every day. And then finally is our career, our work, our passions. That has a major impact on our health. And I think a lot of people don't always think about that and how it affects their health. It's so much of the doing, that we do in Western culture that we sometimes don't think about how that impacts everything else. And so a very long answer to your question is that I think that purpose, I think that passion, work, whether it's outside of the home, inside of the home, it all affects our health. And so having a sense of purpose that lights you up, that nourishes you in some way, that supports your health is really important.
So for anybody that is feeling disconnected from that, or that maybe they're in a work environment that feels toxic or is not supportive of them, what words of wisdom do you have about how to navigate that?
This is not a call for like blowing up your life and saying that if it's not supportive of your health, you have to get rid of it. That's just not reality. I think the point is to find whatever small pieces of joy and happiness and purpose that you can in the work that you're doing. And then also realizing that you can have that supportive function of your health in the other areas of life. Never is it the case for anybody that every aspect of life is going to be 100% supportive of their health. That's just not reality. That's sort of Pollyanna-ish to think that that would be true for every person. And so I don't want to put this out there that there's like some perfect balance. There's no such thing. I think it's more that thinking about the fact that everything in life does affect your health. And that if there are toxins coming from every aspect of your life or many aspects of your life, then you're going to have a lot of problems. And so you need to start thinking about how can you adjust that. But let's say your work is very toxic. It's not supportive of your health. Okay, make small steps to see where can you find the joy and the purpose in that. And then also rely heavily on the other aspects of your life to create that supportive environment for your health. I know I didn't quite answer the question, but I don't know how to answer that question without being dishonest. I mean, I think the honest answer is that there's not really a perfect answer to that question. It's just maybe sort of broadening your perspective on how you look at it.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said. There's both the how can you look at a fresh perspective in your current environment and notice the things that do bring you joy or that do feel good or that are protective. And then I'm hearing you say, sometimes we find our passion and purpose. It's not always in our job. And it may be through volunteer work or through a religious community, any number of other things. I appreciate that very much. Okay, the next guidepost is I, and this stands for invested in yourself. And this is the guidepost where things like your self-care and maybe sort of traditional health practices come, but also how you create space for learning and the things that bring you joy in life. What are some principles or practices from the longevity formula that relate to this?
Well, I would say that probably so many of the practices that I sort of talk about in the book specifically, I talk about different practices that basically switch on these 5 longevity switches that I sort of identified, which are the first switch is to add prana or life force energy into your system. The second is to move that life force energy, move that prana. The third is to remove toxins. The fourth is to sync with nature. And the fifth is to feed or nourish the system. And I've basically taken all of these Ayurvedic practices and sort of divided them into those 5 switches and which longevity switches they turn on. And so I would say probably all of the practices sort of fall into this principle. And I think there's always a few that would be good places to start, but I think really you could start with any of the practices in the book. So
would you be open to sharing one tangible thing, each switch that anybody listening could easily integrate to their life?
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to. I'll share like 3 or 4 that I think are really important. And spoiler alert is that they switch on all of the longevity switches. So,
Sounds very efficient.
Exactly. Let's do that. So, the first one I would say, and this is really from the perspective of really supporting your longevity and your health in general, is to fast for 12 hours overnight. So, really simply, when you should be sleeping, don't be eating. And when nature sleeps, you should be sleeping. And the reason for this is that there's a process called autophagy in our bodies. It's a natural process that we have going on all the time. But as we age chronologically, this process slows down. Fasting happens to be one of the best stimulants of autophagy. And so if we can fast every night for 12 hours where we're not eating anything, we are basically every evening, every night, we are kicking on that autophagy, helping our bodies go through that process of cleanup. And so what we're doing is we're decreasing the accumulation of cellular damage, which causes chronic inflammation, which then adds to aging, physiological aging. So if we can clean up that damage every night, we are supporting our longevity. So just fast for 12 hours. If you stop eating at 7 p.m., don't eat again until 7 a.m. Very simple. So that would be my first suggestion.
Okay. And just a quick clarification there. There's been so much out there around fasting. And typically it seems like it's for longer hours. As if for some people that is maybe good or not helpful. This fast sounds like it's not like those extended hours that some people are doing. It's really more honoring the time frame that you would be sleeping, just extending that time period of your rest a few extra hours.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good place to start. Now, would you want to go for between 14 and 16 hours? Yeah, that's probably the sweet spot for most people. But that doesn't mean that 12 hours isn't helpful because, again, you're stimulating that autophagy, and that's really important. So just start with 12 hours. And then once you get used to that and you feel successful and you feel like you can extend it to 13, then maybe to 14. See how you do.
See how you know.
Yeah. Yes. But 12 hours, just start there.
Okay. What are some of the other extra practices that help you check all the boxes?
Yeah. The next one would be every morning, get outside and do some morning sun viewing for 10 to 20 minutes before 10 a.m., as close to when you wake up. Again, the reason for this is that when we have natural light that hits our retina and the retina sends a signal to the brain then says, oh, let me change the hormones that I am releasing, right? Basically, light is a stimulant for the 2 master hormones, melatonin and cortisol. Melatonin is our sleep hormone. Cortisol is our wake hormone. When we have regulated hormones, which are regulated by light, which is our circadian rhythm, right? We function better. We're actually adding to our health. We're supporting our longevity. When we have dysregulated hormones of melatonin and cortisol, those master hormones control everything downstream. So if you have dysregulation of those master hormones, you're going to have problems all the way down the line. Okay. And so if we can regulate those 2 hormones through the use of light, every morning. We're basically resetting our circadian rhythm every single morning to say, oh, it's morning. It's time to turn off the melatonin and turn on the cortisol. We are regulating those master hormones and we are regulating our hormonal release and therefore every system in the body. So very simple. Get outside into natural light. Let the sun hit your retina. You're not looking directly at the sun, but it's natural sunlight, no sunglasses, not through a window, not through a car window. Get outside, have a cup of coffee. Maybe you go for a quick walk and let your circadian rhythm be reset every morning. That will help a lot with your longevity and supporting your health.
Okay. And then you had one more to share with us.
Yep. One more is to breathe and meditate. It's kind of a twofer. Okay. And mostly because we know both of these things are things that can shift us into a vagal or parasympathetic relaxed state. The reality is that we were not designed as humans to be in a stress response 24 hours a day, but modern living in the modern world has put us into a stress response 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, which we were not designed to do. And so when we can learn how to shift ourselves into this relaxed state, then what we're doing is we're modulating inflammation, we're modulating chronic illness, we're decreasing that because stress is related to every chronic illness that basically contributes to physiological aging. So if we can shift into a relaxed state, we actually can decrease those markers of physiological aging. And so things like meditating for 1 to 3 minutes and breathing, where you slow down your breathing and extend your exhale, you make it longer, that shifts you into a vagal response, a relaxed response. Those are really simple things you can do throughout the day that will, again, put you in that relaxed state and therefore decrease those markers of inflammation, the markers of stress.
I'm stunned by the fact that 1 to 3 minutes of meditation is meaningful, because I think a lot of us think, oh, I can't sit for half an hour and meditate. So we just decide not to do it. But that feels incredibly accessible.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is. I mean, it's been studied that you can get really, really significant effects just by sitting for 1 to 3 minutes or just doing a meditation for 1 to 3 minutes, and then you build from there. But there's definitely effects that happen.
And for those of us who are just like, it doesn't matter how many times I might encourage my mom to meditate. She'll be like, meditate? I don't meditate. A simple way to describe what meditation could look like for somebody who has not grown up meditating and it seems like something they couldn't imagine themselves doing.
Yeah. Meditation is just simply a way to bring your focus to something other than your thoughts, right? So if you can have a point of focus, whether it is observing your breath, a mantra, or an affirmation, maybe it's washing the dishes or running, right? These are all things that can be very meditative. You don't have to be sitting in the lotus position on the floor to meditate, right? It's about being able to get out of your thoughts. So anytime you start thinking about the grocery list and the task list and, oh, I forgot to do this and that, you just bring yourself gently back to whatever that point of focus is, your mantra, your affirmation, you're washing the dishes, the candle flame, whatever it is, right? You bring your mind back to that focus, you're meditating. That's a very simple way to think about it.
So helpful. I just actually put a post up on Facebook with a picture of my dog at the window seat. An interview that I recorded with Melissa Walker, who works with the States Project ahead of the election. When I asked her about one of the practices that helps her invest in herself, she talked about this thing that she has named window time, and where she really just tries to give herself a little bit of space to look out the window and slow down. And I said, oh, I think I have window time. I just didn't have the language for it because my dog loves to sit in the window seat. And so sometimes I will go and sit with her and just pet her and just be focused on how much I love and appreciate her. And it really does slow things down for me. And I really appreciate it. And she said, oh, I do mine with my cat. So we realized there's also this animal connection, a way that they to be more meditative. But I love the deconstruction of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say that window time, your point of focus is sitting in the window, petting your dog or your animal, or just looking out the window and observing, right? So you're out of your thoughts and you're observing what's going on outside of the window. That's our point of focus. It's meditative.
Great. All right. Well, we're at our last guidepost C, which stands for connected to a strong support network. And in many ways, we started there. It's the importance of connection for our children and how we parent. Is there something else that is feeling important to share about how we connect and remember that we're not alone on this journey?
I mean, I think the only other piece I would say is that, this idea of having shared moments of awe, it's actually something I wrote about in the book that was really, really important to me. This idea of sharing that connection point. I tell a story in the book about being in Hawaii with my family when I finished my chemotherapy treatments. Before I was going to have my double mastectomy, we had 4 weeks for me to rest and recover and build my strength. So we went to Hawaii. And the first night we were there, we were in the condo that we were renting and looking out the window. And all of a sudden, we all saw a double rainbow. And it was this shared moment of awe that connected us not only to nature, to what we were seeing, into the universe and the beautiful magnificence of the universe, but also to each other, because it was a shared moment of awe. And so I would say if there's ways that you can have these shared moments of awe, connect with others when you're doing that, whether it's going for a hike together, much like you were, talking about the hikes that you went on with your son and with your clients that you've done. I bet there's some shared awe in that's going on that makes it so meaningful. That's just my guess.
Absolutely.
But seek opportunities to create these shared moments of awe whenever you can. And I think you'll be blown away by how it affects you.
I love that. Yeah, I'm thinking about when I do the milestone hike in person, there's this hike not far from my house. But when we get to the summit, which is fairly easy to get to, it's a 360-degree view and we can see the San Francisco Bay. And there's something about being able to look at something expansive and maybe use that as a metaphor for like, what do we now see about ourselves or our life that we didn't have before? But using nature as a metaphor, that's been really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the shared moments of awe is probably one of the more significant things that I really remember from my journey through breast cancer. That double rainbow is always something I think about. So it was really significant for me.
It's beautiful. Well, we're now getting close to the end of this conversation. I now get to ask you if there is an invitation you have for me and anyone listening for something that you'd like to see us say yes to in our own lives, and particularly in this season. And so I'm remembering some of the original, what I felt like I was in the quest for that made me say, oh, Avanti could come on now and help, which is that we're about to kind of close down the calendar year and move to a time of being together with family for holidays and then welcoming in a new year. We also are on the precipice of a new political reality, and that can also bring many of us are holding stress around that. What are a few things you might invite us to do, particularly during this season?
So one of the things I always talk about at the new year is that there's a lot of hype about new year, new you, and it's a lot of pressure for a lot of people. And it actually is very counter to our nature as human beings, because if you look to nature, nature is hibernating. I live in Chicago. The ground is frozen, everything has sort of died off, all the plants and the flowers and vegetation, and animals are hibernating. It's cold. We're inside. It's a time for going inward. And I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, especially in Western culture, to actually go, 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 make all the goals, hit the gym, do this, do that, right? I really have in the past few years really leaned into instead spending some time in January going inward, because it's after the very busy holiday season, and taking that time to sort of slowly emerge and think about, what does this year hold for me? What is it that I want to do? And I think that maybe also given the politics, the political climate, the sort of change of power that will be happening in January, in the United States, which is going to be very distressing for so many of us. Taking that time to just be still, to go inward, to be with our families, I think it's really important for our health and to really think about what is it that we want. And then maybe push off sort of the new year, new you goals and everything to February when the weather is changing a little bit, starting to break. Again, you follow nature. The buds are starting to come. The ground is starting to thaw a little bit, right? And in the same way, we can start to emerge and start to think about what are our goals and start planting those seeds. So that's what I would invite everyone to do. Take January to go slow.
I love that. And it's funny because over the years, I do this virtual milestone hike experience where we gather online and I lead people through a guided meditation. And we always do it in February. And one of my community members coined this phrase a while ago, and we've adopted it, just like February is the new January. Give yourself time and space in January, and we can look to February and even beyond. Sometimes it's even more into springtime to kind of fully get moving again. So I'm excited about giving myself space in January. My wheels are already turning about like, maybe I take a break from the podcast entirely also in January. And then I think we can link back to some of the other practices, like as we create space and slow down and don't buy into the go, go, go. How do we create more moments to breathe? How do we create more moments of shared moments of awe, getting outside in the morning and seeing the sunshine? I almost feel like there could be like a cool bingo card that we check off.
Yeah.
All the things that we could do.
Yeah, absolutely. You're creating that space for you to put these things into practice for yourself to support your own health and your mental well-being and your spiritual well-being, right? So I think it's important.
Thank you. Well, now we're going to close with acknowledgments. And this is an opportunity for me to share some of the things that I'm taking from this conversation. And also, if there's anything that you're leaving this conversation with, if anything has come into sharper focus for you or that you're really appreciating about our time together. I want to thank you for being a role model for how our lives can unfold in really amazing ways. The way in which you set out to explore this new book. And it was because you slowed down and listened to yourself to make meaning. But then when life came at you in ways you didn't expect, you created space to be present for all of that. And you were able to make meaning of it, which has not only deepened your own life, but has deepened what you're able to bring to us in your new book and in your conversations about it. So thank you for that modeling. I'm also taking away this idea that the choices we make about how we live our lives not only help us to live a better, or in my language, a more epic life, but how they are protective. And even if we have a moment where something comes to us that we feel frustrated or angry about that we weren't expecting, it doesn't mean that the choices that we make and the beautiful things that we have stayed committed to is not helping us. I think that's a really interesting perspective shift for me. And then I think lastly, just this idea that we can tap into ancient practices and our own ancestry and look at them through new ways and how they feel relevant and resonant for us in our life. So thank you for all of those things.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I think what you've sparked in me again is to really think about how this connects to my kids who are so important to me. And sometimes I lose sight of that because they're older. They're both in their 20s and sort of launched into their lives, but we're very, very connected. And so it's a good reminder to think about how what I'm doing and thinking about how it affects them and how I can share more with them. Because sometimes I get so caught up in sharing with patients and students and everybody else that now that they're a little older, I don't share as much with them, that it's a reminder to do that. So thank you for that.
I love that. Well, definitely circle back with me and let me know if anything interesting emerges from that awareness and connecting more with your kids.
I will, for sure.
Thank you so much, Avanti. This was a really special time. And I feel like I'm leaving not only with some really big picture principles about how to live my life and take care of myself, but also a lot of very practical things about how I can easily integrate these ideas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I've really loved being with you. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about how to join the Mother's Quest community, visit mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and help us to spread the word. I want to end with some words to help light the way on your quest. Seize the day, love your people, honor your gifts. Until next time.